talking with Katie Nielson, a founder, co-founder and chief education officer for Voxy EnGen, discussing scaling EdTech in a sustainable way.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me. And I do plan to use my company as an example of how to scale EdTech in a sustainable way. So when I was asked to give this presentation, this was the topic that we settled on. I'm going to give a little intro to myself and an overview of what we're going to go over. I want to talk about EdTech and why it fails and what the secrets are to success. And I'll close out with a real world example. So I'll talk about how you can think through all of the potential pitfalls to set yourself up for an EdTech company that actually can help transform the way people learn. My name's Katie Nielson. I'm the founder and chief education officer of Voxy EnGen, which is a web and mobile platform that we use to help English learners, immigrants, refugees, and speakers of other languages get access to the English skills they need for their real world goals. And what that means here in the United States generally is the skills they need for high value jobs with the potential for economic mobility. We are a public benefit company, which means that our mission is very, very important to our stakeholders. And our mission is to remove English as a barrier so that we can help people advocate for themselves. Now, what is educational technology? That's my first question. And the definition is actually the combined use of computer hardware, software, and educational theory and practice to facilitate learning. And when we talk to it with its abbreviation, talk about it, EdTech, it's often referring to the industry of companies that create educational technology. And EdTech is booming. And I want to talk a little bit about what makes companies successful. So when we look at the educational technology landscape in 2021, post-pandemic, the most, perhaps a super interesting data point is that in 2020, US education technology startups raised over 2.2 billion in venture and private equity capital across 130 deals. This comes from databases that EdSurge runs. At the same time, research on distance blended and technology mediated learning has been going on for decades. Before we had an industry called EdTech, we had research on how technology can help improve outcomes. So we know a lot about how to leverage EdTech to solve problems. And right now, we have a real opportunity to improve access, equity, and inclusion via distance learning and other technology mediated solutions. So this is the climate that we're finding ourselves in as we think about educational technology in 2021. So the big question I have for all of you is, why does EdTech fail? Because while you hear about some very successful companies, there are many, many, many others. And I've had, over the past 10 years of working in educational technology, I've had the opportunity to meet other founders and co-founders to evaluate technology products and to see things that hold a lot of promise, but that fail. And the question is why? And the number one reason why EdTech fails is because people adopt a technology first approach. And what I mean here is that people will go and they will find a technology solution that they like, and they will try to shoehorn that into an educational context. And that is a recipe for failure. So definitely don't start with the technology first. Following very closely on the heels of don't pick a technology and hope that it will help education is you need to have a research basis. So I see apps and tools and programs and hardware, and many of them seem great, but they're just someone's idea. They aren't grounded in any of the research or best practices or need coming out of the educational community. And this is another big pitfall when you're setting up an EdTech company. Lack of product market fit. I mean, this is the reason why many, many companies, regardless of what their mission is, fail, but it happens a lot with educational technology. And this speaks to making sure you know who's going to use your EdTech product and who's going to pay for it. And the last reason is poor design. And I don't mean that the app isn't cool. I mean that you haven't thought about the entire design cycle, from building the platform, getting into the hands of the people who need it, making sure it works, and making it able to scale. So these are the very quick and dirty 4 reasons why EdTech fails. So let's talk about how to solve those problems. And the very first point is you need to include experts. So you can't just decide as a technologist or a business person that you're going to build an educational technology product. You need to include people from the educational ecosystem in your process. Ideally, they get included very high up in your organization where they have a lot of influence over what happens. These are teachers, learners, administrators, and researchers. It's really important to include experts in education in your EdTech product, platform, and business plan, and build them into the entire design, evaluation, and implementation process. When you don't include educational experts and stakeholders, you run the risk of building things that are not useful to them or not based on best practices. And the next big thing, and this is perhaps the most important, is you need to solve a real problem. You can't start with the technology and then work your way into figuring out what it can do. You need to think about a problem that exists. That's why when I opened up this talk, I talked about how technology, we're at a moment when it can help us make education more inclusive and more effective and break down barriers. Those are problems that educational technology can solve. But just starting with an app because your app is cool isn't going to set you up to solve anyone's problems. You don't want to use technology for technology's sake. And implementation is critical. If you're building an EdTech company because you want to solve a problem, you need to make sure that your platform or product or tool is easy to access, that it's easy to use, that your stakeholders can find it and know what to do with it, which speaks to knowing your audience. Are you building something for parents or students or learners or administrators? Who's it for? And then what's the easiest way for them to access it and what problem does it solve for them? And if it's possible, don't limit yourself to a specific type of technology. Things change and you want to be able to adapt. The last best practice really is to build for growth. Now, what does that mean? It means you need to measure outcomes. Every successful EdTech product that scales can measure whether or not it works and can communicate that out so that stakeholders can see the value in it. Because you want stakeholder support. In order to build for growth, people need to like what you're building and understand why and how it works and know your audience. You need to know how to report those outcomes and how to measure them. You also want to design for scale. And what this means is you want to try, if you can, to have your platform be flexible so that there are multiple ways to implement it, because otherwise you're going to box yourself in to having a solution that meets the needs of one group of stakeholders, but can't extend to meet the needs of others. So if you can design your product in a flexible way, as your business grows, you'll be able to adapt your solution. So I wanted to, and this speaks to my own organization, give a real world example. As I said, I am the founder and the chief education officer of Voxy EnGen, and this is a platform that I built inside of my previous employer. And I've now incubated a new company with a new mission using technology that I was able to build and design that I've used for about 8 years all over the world, helping people learn English. But the problem, as I said, you need to solve a big problem. The problem that I'm solving right now is that English is the enabling skill for integration and opportunity in the United States, but the United States reaches only 4% of our adult learners. This is a huge problem. That in 2021, the way we teach English to new Americans remains outdated, ineffective, and completely unscalable. So I said to find a problem to solve, this is definitely a problem. And then I said, you need to consult an expert. And luckily, I'm both an entrepreneur and an expert in language learning. I've done this for 25 years. My PhD is in second language acquisition, but I also regularly consult other experts in technology, in language learning, and English teaching. Learning a language requires acquiring a skill, not studying a content area. And what that means is that we need to approach instruction in a different way. I built a research-based framework for language learning. Every learner in my platform gets access to input, the opportunity to produce the language themselves, the opportunity to interact with other speakers, and feedback on error. These four things come from decades of research on language learning from many, many, many people. Again, this speaks to solving a real problem and consulting experts. And it's based in a framework called task-based language teaching, which gives us a framework for both using the platform to teach language, but also measuring outcomes. It's contextualized English instruction that's based on the real world needs of language learners so that they're getting the language they need for the jobs of the future. Because what we really need to do to solve that problem of reaching the 96% of immigrants, refugees, and speakers of other languages in the US is not just adding capacity to existing programs. It's using technology to offer new avenues for reaching learners, whether it's through the jobs they have now or the workforce training organizations they're participating in. We need to help add capacity so that language learners can improve their English wherever they are. So to summarize, if you want to have an EdTech platform or product or company that can scale, you need to solve a real problem, and then you need to include stakeholders, both the people who will use your platform or product, but also the ones who know what it should do in every step of the design and testing and revision process. And to build for scale, you have to both measure outcomes and you also have to build in as flexible a way as possible so that you don't box yourself into a solution that only works for a subset of the market that you're trying to reach.